Hey y'all, trying to get my tech together, so give me a sec. Ensure there's no echo. All right, if you can hear me, leave a comment. All right. I see my sister Wallace is here. I'm gonna post up. Hey Lemney, hey Yaya, hey Wallace. I'm gonna post up some lyrics for a song that's in Spanish. I'm gonna put lyrics for both English and Spanish. Some for us to listen to while we wait for folks to come on. As you're listening, you will probably want to grab, pencil and paper, because you'll need something to write on. Nothing, it won't be too much writing, but you'll need something to write on. Or if writing is a challenge for you, this exercise will also work if you have someone to talk to or someone to text. And it'll make sense later on, so. All right.
Soy lo que dejaron, soy toda la sobra de lo que se robaron. Un pueblo escondido en la cima, mi piel es de cuero, por eso aguanta cualquier clima. Soy una fábrica de humo, mano de obra campesina para tu consumo. Frente de frío en el medio del verano, el amor en los tiempos del cólera, mi hermano. El sol que nace y el día que muere, con los mejores atardeceres. Soy el desarrollo en carne viva, un discurso político sin saliva. Las caras más bonitas que he conocido, soy la fotografía de un desaparecido, la sangre dentro de tus venas. Soy un pedazo de tierra que vale la pena una canasta con frijoles. Soy Maradona contra Inglaterra, anotándote 2 goles. Soy lo que sostiene mi bandera, la espina dorsal del planeta en mi cordillera. Soy lo que me enseñó padre, que no quiere a su patria, no quiere a su madre. Soy América Latina, un pueblo sin pierna pero que camina. Oye,
tú no puedes comprar al viento, tú no puedes comprar al sol, tú no puedes comprar la lluvia, tú no puedes comprar el calor, tú no puedes comprar las nubes, tú no puedes comprar los colores, tú no puedes comprar mi alegría, tú no puedes comprar mi dolor. Tú no puedes comprar al viento, tú no puedes comprar al sol, tú no puedes comprar la lluvia, tú no puedes comprar el calor, tú no puedes comprar las nubes, tú no puedes comprar los colores, tú no puedes comprar mi alegría, tú no puedes comprar mis dolores.
tengo los lagos, tengo los ríos, Tengo mis dientes pa' cuando me sonrío, la nieve que maquilla mis montañas. Tengo el sol que me seca y la lluvia que me baña. Un desierto embriagado con peyote, un trago de pulque para cantar con los coyotes. Todo lo que necesito. Tengo a mis pulmones respirando azul clarito, la altura que sofoca. Soy las muelas de mi boca, mascando coca. Y el otoño con sus hojas desmayadas, los versos escritos bajo la noche estrellada. Una viña repleta de uva, un cañaveral bajo el sol en Cuba. Soy el mar Caribe que vigila las casitas, haciendo rituales y agua bendita, el viento que peina mi cabello. Soy todos los santos que cuelgan de mi cuello. El jugo de mi lucha no es artificial, porque el abono de mi tierra es natural.
Tú no puedes comprar el viento, tú no puedes comprar el sol, tú no puedes comprar la lluvia, tú no puedes comprar el calor, tú no puedes comprar las nubes, tú no puedes comprar los colores, tú no puedes comprar mi alegría, tú no puedes comprar mis dolores. No se pode comprar o vento, não se pode comprar o sol, não se pode comprar a chuva, não se pode comprar o calor. Não se pode comprar as nuvens, não se pode comprar as cores, não se pode comprar minha alegria, não se pode comprar minhas dores. Não puedes comprar el sol, no puedes comprar la lluvia. Y no amor, vamos tanto y nada. Dibujando el sol. No puedes comprar mi vida. No se vende.
Trabajo bruto, pero con orgullo. Aquí se comparte, lo mío es tuyo. Este pueblo no se ahoga con marullo. Y si se derrumba, yo lo reconstruyo. Tampoco pestañeo cuando te miro, para que te recuerdes de mi apellido. La operación Cóndor invadiendo mi nido. Perdono, pero nunca olvido. Oye,
vamos caminando, aquí se respira lucha. Vamos caminando, yo canto porque se escucha. Vamos, si yo aquí estamos de pie. ¡Que viva la América! No puedes comprar mi vida.
All right, y'all. Si necesita interpretación en español, en los comentarios hay un número que puede llamar, el 781-448-4321 con el PIN 48672. So if you need Spanish interpretation or know somebody that needs interpretation, you call the line 781-448-4321. And there's a PIN 48672. There are a couple of folks on our comment section, Janae, Lemni, and if anybody wants to volunteer at this point to translate English comments into Spanish, because Facebook Live won't do that for us. If you would just hit reply on whoever's commenting in English and rewrite what they're saying in Spanish, that would be great. And just to note also, when this is saved on Facebook, it'll be saved on the event page, it'll be saved on my timeline, it'll be saved on the Root page, it'll be saved on the Root website. In all of those spaces, there will be subtitles available in Spanish. If folks need them in other languages, or you know somebody that needs it in a different language, let me know, I can hook that up. And there will also be captions available for folks that need that. Okay. Unfortunately, Facebook doesn't give me the option of giving you access to caption on live, not without buying expensive third-party software, which I don't have, but we will make that available afterwards as it's posted. So the song that I played, Soy America Latina, is a song that reminds me about resilience, right? There are things that allow us to move forward, that we inherit, right, from our ancestors, and that we create for ourselves to allow ourselves to survive, to do more than just maintain, but to feel alive, that other people just can't touch, right? So the song, if you read the lyrics, it talks about, there's certain things that you just can't buy, certain things that you just can't touch, and despite the fact that we might be faced with some, material deficits, we still find a way, and we're here because our ancestors have found a way, right? And in our last session, we talked about resourcing, we talked about resilience, we talked about the work that our ancestors have done to bring us here, right? And we're going to carry some of that information through into today's session, right? So I just want to acknowledge that work, the work that our ancestors have done to bring us to where we're at today, to give us access to the choices that we have. I also want to acknowledge the ancestors of those that have come together to create this work. And I'm thinking particularly about Amy Paulson and Antoine Olivier. Every time I do this work, I feel their work in the space. I feel their ancestors' work in the space. So I'm giving thanks to them. I'm giving thanks to my ancestors. I'm giving thanks to the spirit of this land that I feel this work is in conversation with, and makes it possible for this land to be given back to, and ceded to the Ohlone people. I'm live from Oakland, California right now. I want to invite you guys to also, think about how the work that you're doing in your own personal healing and collective healing is also in conversation with the people of the land that you are in. Acknowledge the work that your ancestors have done to allow you to be here today, right? And with that, I want to start off by reading a poem about resilience, right? One of my favorite poets, Lucille Clifton, and some of you might recognize this. It's called "Won't You Come Celebrate With Me?" I'm gonna read it slow for our interpreters on the line. Won't you come celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed, right? This poem reminds me of the ways that I and many other courageous folks that I know have had to lead ourselves out of our pain, out of our trauma, and figure out some way out of no way, right? When she says, I had no model, right? I think of the ways that we are trying to create models that work for us, right? And as part of the work that we're gonna do today is to try to understand, what is the work that needs to be done in order for us to address some emotional discomfort, some of the trauma that are embedded within our bodies, right? So I'll do an overview of what we explored last session, right? So we talked about that, about what it means when our bodies are holding on to narrative, what our bodies are holding on to memory, right? And we talked about somatic healing, what that means when our bodies become like familiar with toxicity. We did an exercise around this, if you can remember. We talked about the brain on trauma, right? We talked about fight, flight, and freeze as protective responses, the ways that our bodies have learned over generations and today continue to figure out how to protect itself when it's feeling a threat, right? We also talk about resourcing and the difference between coping and resourcing, and how coping is how we try, the kind of strategies that we use to try to survive a particular moment, right? A kind of like short-term survival strategies whenever we're feeling triggered or just any kind of emotional discomfort. And the difference between that and resourcing, some of the things that we do on a continual basis to kind of bring us to center, right? And create some kind of more long-term capacity for us to recognize and become familiar with that center, right? And then we talked about breathing and tracking, ways of, just becoming aware of like where we are in our bodies. And we did this because we live in a society that doesn't encourage us or doesn't give us the chance to even just slow down time and allow us to just wonder, well, what's going on for me? What do I need, right? So I want us to let's try that now. Just check in with where your body is right now, and think about, just don't even think, just breathe, just be present, just get a sense if it's easy for you if it's okay or feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. You don't have to, you can lower your gaze. You can look at something beautiful in the space, right? Whatever it is that helps you, become present. Could be holding on to something soft, something that brings you pleasure, joy, right? And just notice where your breath is. Is it deep? Is it shallow? I'm also doing this for myself because being on live is kind of different for me. It's only my second time doing this. So I noticed before I had like a tightness in my abdomen, but it's like loosening up now. It felt good to just kind of acknowledge the awkwardness of talking to a camera, right? I'm happy to see folks on the live that I know. Yvette, I remember you. And with these comments, I'm taking in all the love with this breath, and you can do this for yourself too. So think about what brings you joy and breathe that in. And notice how breathing just changes your body. So breathing is probably the most accessible resource for a lot of folks. So I want to encourage folks to practice this strategy, practice this tool as we do some of the work that we do today, right? So just to give an overview, today we're going to dig like a little bit deeper into engaging with emotional discomfort. We're not going to like do anything that's going to invite folks to kind of like relive like trauma or anything like that. We want to just kind of like skim the surface just to become familiar with some tools that we can utilize when things get tough, right? So if you were here for session 1, I asked folks to practice one thing on your resourcing list, right? And just notice how that thing made you feel, right? So just as a reminder, again, resourcing is like something that you do on a continual basis, preferably that causes you to feel more capacity, that causes you to feel grounding long-term, right? And some of the examples that people gave were like exercising, going for a walk, taking a bath, right? Talking to someone, right? Looking outside, looking at the sky, having a cup of tea, right? So I want us to kind of just check in, think about, your last week, think about a moment when you did something that created that capacity for you, right? That allowed you to have access to that calm, right? And let's just kind of check in. What's the one resourcing thing you did and how did it make you feel? How did it impact you? And my comments come out a little bit delayed. That's one thing about Facebook Live that's funny. So check in with one and just share on the chat one resourcing strategy that you used that helped you come back to center, come back to grounding, create more expansiveness, right? And then how did that make you feel? How did it impact you? And you can answer even if you weren't in the last workshop, even if you didn't listen to the last workshop. Just think of one thing that you did that caused some kind of shift in you, right? So for me, yesterday I was in my feelings because I'm reading this book that is really challenging my own like just healing practice, and I thank Sage Hayes for recommending this book, The Places That Scare You. And I needed to go on a hike to just kind of check in with myself and see what's coming up for me, right? So that was something that I prioritized yesterday. And what that did for me is that it allowed the work to kind of, sink in. I felt a little bit less resistant to some of the emotional challenges that were coming up in the work. The work is about, part of the work is about deepening your compassion for folks that you might have or share tension with. And haven't even really started the practice. I'm just taking notes, and even just reading that for me and imagining myself doing some of these exercises, it just kind of like brings a lot to the surface. And so I needed to, be out and look at some fresh water and hear some birds, and just kind of observe nature to help me, place where all of these things, or just kind of understand what's coming up for me. Not necessarily place them anywhere yet, but just try to understand what's coming up for me. Let me check your comments here. So I don't know if my chat is just super slow, but okay, I see Dakua. Organized papers and old files, felt grounded while focusing on something productive and knowing that it could help me going forward, felt rewarding, beneficial, relaxing, ease mind. Okay, so clearing up space for yourself, that can be resourcing. Yeah, we didn't talk about cleaning. Cleaning can also be a form of another resourcing strategy too. So yeah, right on with that. Right. Anyone else? Anyone like exercise or have like a morning ritual where you just like, drink your tea and just wake up 30 minutes before the kids or stay 30 minutes later and just like take some time for yourself to just kind of center. So I'm encouraging folks to practice that, help bring you back to center. And throughout this workshop, I'm doing this check-in too because I want us to just kind of familiarize ourselves with that sensation. Because throughout this workshop, if you're feeling a little bit emotionally overwhelmed, and you're feeling like you're experiencing more than you were ready for, I want to encourage folks to just come back to whatever that feeling was. So think of right now, if you can, think of a thing that brings you back to center, that makes you feel grounded, right? That makes you feel a sense of calm, right? And then try to hold on to that memory and know that you can come back to that feeling, right? And we've talked about in the last session how our minds, we can train our minds to come, into whatever space that we need, simply by just, thinking a thought, right? A thought can cause you to feel triggered and uncomfortable, but a thought can also cause you to feel grounded, right? So if for you feeling grounded, is smelling your jasmine incense, you may not have jasmine incense around you right now, but if you kind of just imagine the last time you smelled that and how it made you feel, you can recreate that sensation in your body too, right? So Wallace says exercising made me feel free and release a lot of tension. Yup, me too. Yup. Betsaida, meditation. Yup. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so come back to those moments whenever you're feeling, if you're ever feeling like you're emotionally overwhelmed, right? So I want to start off with an experiment here, right? I hope I won't regret this. But here I have a bottle of sparkling water. I'm checking my tech here, making sure. Bottle of sparkling water, right? So I'm gonna shake it for a little while. Let me make sure I can see a comment. So I'm gonna shake it for a little while, right? And this bottle is going to be a metaphor for what happens when we're holding on to our traumas, right? When we're holding on to whatever story it is that brings us, from calm to whatever the opposite of grounding is for you, right? And I want to introduce this idea that Peter Levine uses to kind of describe what that means, right? To bottle up, this kind of like emotional tension, right? So he uses this term titration, which he actually borrowed from chemistry. And this is a process that you use when you take two chemical substances, and you fuse them together. That will, that initially, if you fuse them together, and in one instant, it will create like an explosion, right? And for example, if you take sodium hydroxide, right, and hydrochloric acid, if you kind of put them in the same container, pour them in the same container, much like, if I open this bottle now, right, it'll explode, right? But if you take these two substances, right, you have, let's say, the caustic soda, sodium hydroxide in one container, right? And you have in another container your hydrochloric acid, and you take a dropper, right? And you take one drop from one chemical and just drop it little by little into the other container. What happens over time is that it neutralizes the other chemical, right? And what you get when you combine these two chemicals is water, essentially, right? So you're taking two very toxic or chemicals, right? And turning them into water through this process titration, right? So how does this work as a metaphor for this? So I want us to recall from our last session, we talked about how our bodies become familiar with toxic patterns, sensations, right? And I want to talk about why this happens. So this happens because our bodies want to resolve any unresolved trauma, right? So for example, if you were mistreated by a caretaker, right, or a parent growing up, perhaps you might notice that some of the partners that you attract may have some of the qualities of, the caretaker, the parent that mistreated you, right? And that might not be by coincidence. That might be because your body is trying to figure out a way, it's trying to invite this situation and say, okay, this time we're gonna do it, but it's gonna work out differently, right? It wants to resolve whatever that trauma is, right? But what actually happens when we relive our traumas in this way is that as the body is trying to resolve it, we actually end up deepening the wound, right? Reinscribing the wound, right? Some of the other ways that we relive our traumas, right, aside from trying to recreate our traumas, in our relationships with other people, might be retelling the story, right? And some of you might know somebody that re-experiences their trauma in this ways that they tell their story over and over, right? Or you might be rethinking your story, right? In your mind, this is another way that you can relive your trauma, is to just kind of like play the trauma over in your mind over and over, or in your dreams, right? For a lot of folks, this whole pandemic is a way of, it's not just it is an actual trauma, right? For a lot of people, they're experiencing or facing like real death, right, and sickness, loss of, income, their jobs, right? But at the same time, some folks might be experiencing real trauma and being re-traumatized, right? Some of the past memories might be relived through, isolation. Isolation can be a trigger. Crowdedness can be a trigger, right? The fear of sickness or death, right, can be both a trigger and, an actual trauma, right? Silence, for those that are, being faced with, isolation, that in itself can be a trigger, right? The insecurity, losing your job can be a trigger. Just that feeling of insecurity, right? And then, many of us are losing or distanced from our coping and resourcing strategies. So the kind of things that you used to do that used to help bring you back to center are no longer available for you, right? And so it becomes more difficult to address, some of the trauma that's coming up for you, right? So let's take the example of telling the story, right? So some folks may tell, so think of a situation where you had a difficult experience, right? And, probably the first thing you want to do is call up a friend and tell them, hey, you know what happened, right? And then you notice that when you're telling the story, you tend to relive the story, and your body is actually feeling the same sensations that it felt when it was experiencing that trauma, right? So this is a lot like what would happen if I open this bottle, right? It'll start to explode, right? We're not going to do that. But what we're going to experiment with now, what we're going to do here is to think about, well, what happens, right? If we try to hack into our bodies or train our bodies or invite our bodies to try something different, to instead of, wanting to, have this experience of like word vomit, if you're retelling the story, is to try to uncover, the story or bits and pieces of the story little by little, right? So slowly opening and closing, slowly opening and closing. For those of you who drink kombucha, right? Isn't that just how you hold or open your bottle of kombucha, right? This is how I do it because it almost always explodes on me, right? Right? Slowly opening and closing. And what this is a metaphor for is to look at the different bits and pieces of that frustration, that anger, that shame that you might be feeling, right? That you might be experiencing, and asking questions about, well, what's underneath there? What's going on there, right? What's beneath these feelings? Why am I feeling these things, right? So we talked about how fight, flight, and freeze are protective responses. So then the next step is for us to try to question, well, what is it that our bodies are trying to tell us? What is it that it's trying to protect us from, right? What is the underlying threat? What is the actual threat, or what is the perceived threat, right? And remember that when we're experiencing, when we're re-experiencing trauma, when we're being triggered, we're actually reliving the past, right? Where actually our bodies don't know the difference, or our the part of our mind that doesn't control logical thought is the one that is present, right? We don't have access to the thinking brain, right? And it thinks that it's re-experiencing a past trauma, right? So the question is like, okay, to try to look in there and see, well, what's going on? What's coming to the surface for me, right? And we don't do this by opening the bottle and allowing things to explode, right? We have to take things, little by little, inch by inch, right? Little turn by turn, right? So I want us to kind of delve into this in a way that feels accessible, in a way that doesn't feel too threatening, right? And I'm going to see, I got my tech last time. I was using the chart paper. I'm still use chart paper, but I'm going to, boom, I'm gonna share this with you guys, right? So I said in the beginning that you might want, to grab paper, pen and paper to work with, right? And so what we're going to do is to recall a moment. Let me get to the window. Yeah. To recall a moment where you felt frustration, irritation, annoyance, right? So don't pick a moment that's gonna like, allow you to experience some like deep seated trauma. Like just like, it could be like moment of road rage or, something somebody said or some microaggression that you experienced in the line at the grocery store, something like that, right? So think of a moment, a brief moment where you experienced that frustration, that irritation and annoyance, right? Don't get too caught up on, making sure you're choosing the right moment. Any moment that you choose is the right one, right? But again, try to, pick something that's not going to take you through some deep-seated trauma that's really difficult for you to come out of. So, think of something that's a little bit less intense. Mm-hmm. So you're writing this in a notebook. I'm not going to invite folks to share the story on the chat. We're just calling up this memory. So use as much detail as possible. Think of who said what, what are the things that happened. And I'm going to give us like 4 minutes to write, okay? So starting now, 4 minutes.
I can't forget the glamour.
Okay. So it's okay if you didn't finish your story, if you're still writing it. The next thing I'm going to invite you to do, let me get back on my slide. You might need to think about this for a moment before you share in the chat, is to go back into your story and try to remember what was your body feeling at the time. And we want to get more concrete, right? And maybe we're not used to talking about our bodies in this way. So I have some sentence starters here. Examples. I felt blank in my blank, or my hands were blank, and you would describe what your hands were doing or feeling. There was a blank, whatever that sensation was in your blank, what part of your body. Or I felt numbness in my blank, or my legs were doing what, right? So think for a moment, go back to your story, and see if you can remember what was your body feeling at that time. What were you experiencing in your body in that moment? And for this, yes, type it on the chat. We'd love to see how folks experienced their emotional discomfort. Or also, if that feeling could have like a color or a shape or a texture, you can include that too. What was that color? What was that shape? What was that texture? I'm gonna, as you guys are sharing, I'm gonna create like a visual collective representation of all of our emotional discomforts on this one doe person, right? So tightening in the chest, right? Tight. Rapid breathing. And last session we talked about what happens to our breathing when we're feeling tension, right? We talked about how like how to deep breathe, right? Breathing into your belly. And I mentioned how like when we notice babies breathing, we notice that they're breathing into their bellies, and then as we become adults, our breathing kind of moves upwards here, and that's because we start to accumulate, so much tension. So that's right on that tightening in the chest and that rapid breathing. Right, yes, that is a sign of emotional discomfort. Holding on to that tension. I'm seeing Kathy saying shoulders, neck tensed up, right? Gut tightened up, hand rolled into a fist. Right? So I'm hearing Dakua saying, current memories brought up memories of past experiences I did not want to relive. So if you're feeling like this, like that, like it's taking you down a spiral, and it's too intense, again, come back to that feeling of resourcing that you felt, that calm and grounding that you felt, right? And become aware of like where you are right now. You're not reliving the moment. We're here on chat. We're having a conversation, and we're talking about some tools that we can use to address some emotional discomfort on Facebook Live. Right? I hear Kathy saying, forgetting to breathe. Right? Anyone else? How did you experience that emotional discomfort physically? That memory? And I love the way these sentences are modeled. Also, the way you guys are modeling what it looks like to talk about what's going on with your body. Thank you, thank you, thank you for our translators. Our interpreters, sorry. Yes. Okay. So for folks that are joining us, we started with an exercise where we recalled a moment where we felt frustration, where we felt some kind of emotional discomfort, tension, annoyance, right? We took some time. We took 5 minutes to write about it, to kind of just recall the details of that memory. And now what we're doing is we're tapping into that moment and reliving it through a different lens and trying to notice, well, what was coming up, what was happening to my body as I was experiencing that moment, right? And there's going to be another layer of questions that we're going to ask next, right? I'm seeing Wallace saying, I felt my blood boiling and my hand was squeezing my cell phone as I watched time pass. Ooh, I could see those veins flowing into those hands, squeezing, right? It's hot, blood boiling. As I watch time pass, I think that's an interesting phrase too, right? That's another protective, response, is just kind of like seeing what's happening, and kind of disengaging. That's a form of like freezing, like you're disengaging from what was happening and seeing it happening as if it's not happening to you, as if it's happening in a movie, perhaps. Right? So then the next layer of questions now is, what protective responses can you identify? Like I just talked about freezing in that moment. Maybe there are some other things that you can recall, Wallace, but what protective responses do you think you were experiencing? Was it, we talked about in our last session, what fight looks like, what flight looks like, what freeze looks like. And remember, we talked about how these things happen not just in the external world, things that we do in the physical world, but also how we turn these responses inward, right? And remember that the threat that you're feeling, so the next question is, what was the threat? Right? And that threat can be real threat, can be a perceived threat, it could be a threat to your physical self. It could be a threat to your emotional self, it could be a threat to your ego as well. So take some time to think about what was the threat and then what were you protecting, right? So I have some sentence starters for you here too. So when you're thinking about the feeling, what did it want? Why was it there, right? It wanted what? It was there because what? It needed what? It told me that I was missing what, right? It showed me that I have a lot of what, right? And when we're thinking about the impact of the feeling, right? It kept me from blank. It made me blank. It came up because blank. It hid itself when blank, right? So you can use these sentence starters to think about what the threat was, right? If the threat was a threat to your emotional self, right? Your ego. And then think about what you were protecting there, right? As you're reliving the moment. And because remember, when we're re-experiencing the past, or when we're experiencing or being triggered in the moment, our response may not be to what's actually happening in the moment. Yes, it might, but there might be some other underlying layers, right? Some other underlying things that are coming up for you, right? That may or may not be relevant to what's happening in that moment, right? So what was being harmed? What was being threatened there, right? What was coming up for you? What were you protecting, right? And that thing that wanted protection, what did it want, right? What did it want from you, from the situation, from the person that you were having that tension with, right? Why was that feeling there? What did that part of you need? Whatever needed that protection, right? So take some moment to think about and tap in what was going on for you in that moment. Let me look at the comments. I see Kathy say, I wish I could see time pass rather than see time freeze. Our bodies, man, it does what it knows how to do though, so no shame about how your body responds. It's just doing what it knows how to do to protect itself in that moment, right? I'm hearing Wallace say, verbally fight, definitely fight verbally. Okay, so you were fighting, right? Verbal fight. That was the protective response. So then what was the threat? What was being threatened within you in that particular moment? I'm seeing Kathy say, it showed me I have a lot of getting over past trauma. It made me feel as a victim. The threat was felt as I relived being punked. Okay, so as my pride was being stepped on, how I could get punked when I am, how can I get punked when I'm the one helping? I was protecting my pride, my person, that no one has the right to come and yell at me the way that person did when not harming, but rather helping. So that is some real serious self-awareness there, right? So you're acknowledging that you were fighting and that the thing that was being threatened was your pride, your sense of dignity, right? And that needed protection. And I'm seeing that you're recognizing that that this had a lot to do with past trauma, not just the moment that triggered that past trauma, right? So, for example, if somebody cuts me off, and and flicks me or something as I'm like driving in traffic, which happens a lot in Oakland, around here by the lake, particularly Lake Merritt, I might feel a sting, right? And that might have less to do with that person cutting me off and more about my more about how where I am in my relationship to my own, ego, my own, integrity, or not my integrity, but my sense of self, right? Um, it might be bringing up some past issues or some past moments, in the past where perhaps like, a parent, I'm thinking particularly like with my dad, it might bring up some of the ways that my dad used to call me out my name, how he used to, call me names. And he tried really hard to like, to hit that button. And that might be calling up that memory, or that sensation, maybe not a specific moment, but a collection of moments, right? And it comes up right when this like random stranger is trying to cut me off and then, calling me out my name in that one particular moment, right? And then my response might be to like respond the way that I wanted to respond to my dad, right? Or maybe I might respond the way I used to respond to my dad, right? And in that moment, I might be like reliving that past trauma, right? But it's important for us to recognize, okay, like, well, what's the button that just got hit? What's going underneath? Like, why is my body feeling tense right now? Why am I feeling this like, burning, sensation in my chest, right? I'm noticing that my body is having a physical response. Okay, what is coming up for me? What needs protection? What needs care? What needs love, right? And this is what this exercise is really trying to get at, is trying to understand, okay, where are these stories sitting? What is the story that's sitting within me, right? Even if you can't recall like a specific memory, some people can. Some people, can't pinpoint it, but the sensation is real, right? Is there, and we're responding to it, right? So sometimes sitting with that and just like, as we were doing with our experiment, instead of like, getting out my car and like cussing out this dude and like, allowing the bottle to explode, I'm gonna like pause and I'm gonna sit and try to figure out little by little, okay, what am I feeling? What's going on for me, right? What needs care, right? What can I do in response to whatever is coming up for me, right? And you can open up more choice, right? I'm seeing Dakua say, my silence was to protect the feelings of others. My silence was to protect the feelings of others. The threat was me not comprehending the importance growing up, not living as responsibly as I could. I'm taking a deep breath. I'm seeing like this feeling of like a lack of agency, a lack of like not being able to respond the way that you wish you responded in the past, right? So that's the underlying narrative. That's the underlying story, right? I'm seeing like a lot of gold really coming up in some of your shares here. Right? A lot of gold coming up in some of your shares. So I wanted to take a moment and breathe, right? So this exercise is not to bring feelings of shame around our responses. Because again, this is our body trying to take care of itself, take care of its physical self, its emotional self, its spiritual self, its, integrity, right? And it's easy for us to forget that, in that moment. And we've talked about this in our last session, how our thinking brain goes offline when we're responding. And then we're having like these other protective responses where our body is not concerned with, all of these other more abstract things. The body is concerned with like, all right, how are we going to get out of this moment? Fight? Are we gonna leave? Is it better to freeze? Right? It made me outburst. I'm seeing Wallace saying it made me outburst because I felt like I was wasting time. So I'm seeing here again like a lack of like, agency, a lack of feeling response, right? And this is a reminder that sometimes like just kind of like the everyday, things that occur on the grocery line or in our homes in conversation with our children, when we might be like quick or when we snap, right? It's really not about, or it may not just be about the conversation that you're having with your kid or somebody cutting you off, on the grocery line, right? What's coming up for you that's making you like snap and making you quick, it might be some of these underlying unresolved, traumas, right? And in these like moments where at the surface level, we want to like snap and like, ooh, here's my opportunity, right? This is the bottle wanting to like open up and just like, go off, right? And as I said, this, when we do that, we're kind of like deepening the wound and re-inscribing the wound, right? But when we take the time to really just think about what's going on, what's the story, what's happening, like I'm seeing some folks, saying that, I wish I had more choice. I wish I had done this, or I wish I had, had access to that, right? One of the things that we could do is to think about, again, coming present, taking a deep breath, and then thinking about, okay, where can I practice choice now, right? Where do I have the opportunity to shape or reshape my experiences now, right? Because right now, you might not be re-experiencing that same trauma, right? If you're not re-experiencing that same trauma, right, you have the ability to give yourself the care, right, that you deserved, in that moment in time, right? I'm holding on to this part of my body right now because sometimes, this is where I tend to hold on to my tension. And I'm reading all of these and I'm feeling and I'm taking in these tensions, and this is where I'm holding it. So I want to invite you guys to, try to feel into your body and where do you hold your tension. Some people were saying like their hands, some people were saying like their chest, and just like place your hands on there. Where are you feeling the tension now as you're reliving that story or reliving your past? And just embrace that part of yourself, right? Try to hold on to that part of yourself. Embrace it and know that this is your body trying to love itself and trying to care for itself. I'm seeing you, Kathy. I wish I could realize it faster before popping off on someone and feeling the discomfort. You were taking care of your body. Your body was taking care of you. Rather, your body was doing what it needed to do to take care of itself. And now you're in a place where it looks like you have some amazing self-awareness of what comes up for you, man. And that is a gift. That is a gift because there's a saying that says, when you know better, you do better, right? So now you have more options, right? You see what's coming up for you. Now you can pause and now you can think, well, something's coming up for me. I need to pause and care for that thing that needs care right now. So I want us to just kind of breathe in to whatever it is, wherever it is that you're feeling that narrative, that story right now, and give it the embrace that it deserves. Give it the embrace that you deserve, right? And I want us to actually thank our bodies for responding the way that it does, for protecting itself, right? So thank your body for protecting you the best way it knew how, right? For loving you. And know that your body will continue to protect and love you, and you're going to work with this one body that you have, and you're going to continue to love this body. You're going to continue to give this body more choice. Right now, just you being present here and engaging in this video, thank you for your healing work, right? You are doing that right now in the moment. You are engaging in choice right now in the moment, right? You are doing the work. You have been doing the work, and you're continuing to do the work right here, right now. Right? So healing work, as we talked about before, is difficult, right? We talked about, this juxtaposition here. If you didn't watch or weren't here for session 1, I invite you guys to go back, and you'll know what this means, why I'm doing this, right? So the tension involved in healing work is a window into, I think, wisdom and the medicine that we need to deal with and to work through and to care for some of the unresolved trauma that we have, right? And it's a space that allows for complexity to exist, and it's a space where we invite that complexity, right? And the goal of healing, I mean, and I want folks to like take what works for them and leave what doesn't. The goal of healing is not necessarily to always, be happy, and like, nothing's going to make you ever feel sad or angry again. Like that's not life. Life is full of like ebb and flow, right? And the goal of healing work is to allow us to experience these moments without being stuck in them, right? Without necessarily recall some of those past traumas and then just kind of like stay stuck there, right? We want to access a sense of like fluidity, right? And self-awareness and what's coming up for us. And for those of us that have experienced trauma, it takes a little bit more work for us to get there, right? I want to call up this one passage from Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. Let's see if you guys can see. Oh, I'm going to take out the screen share here. Boom. My bad. Okay. So this is one essay from Sister Outsider called Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. And this essay is about challenging folks to speak, right? And to act even when we're afraid, right? And to not prioritize our fears over what needs to be said and what needs to be done, right? Towards the end of the essay, she writes, "We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired." And I know that this probably sounds familiar to hella folks. Like, how many folks have had to show up for work when you're hella tired, right? Or have had to like do a chore when you're hella tired, or have had to like get up in the morning and you want to sleep and you're hella tired, but you do it anyway, right? You get up, and you show up to work, and you've created and you've taught your body how to hold space for that complexity, right? I'm not encouraging folks to not get enough sleep, right? And I'm not saying that, that we should walk around hella tired all the time. We need to, do some work as a society to make sleep, to prioritize sleep. But here she says, "We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. For we have been socialized to respect fear more than our own needs for language and definition. And while we wait in that silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, the weight of that silence will choke us, right? So this passage here makes me think about, well, where would I be if I had never understood what was happening to my body when I was, you know, um, responding and, you know, being quick or numbing out and checking out? Like, how would my life be different if I didn't have that awareness, if I didn't have that um, ability to choose to respond differently, right? I would have never had access to the expansiveness, you know, that I do now. I would have always be caught, you know, in the cycle where I'm just kind of like recreating and reliving that wound, right? And I'm remembering the first day of, you know, seeing this one therapist, and I said, man, I'm just tired of reliving, of feeling this way. I didn't have the words to say reliving these triggers. I'm just tired of feeling this way, man. Like, I just want to see this person and not feel what I feel, right? I want this person to not have the impact that they have on me. Like, man, fix me, right? At that point, I had hit like a certain rock bottom where I knew that I couldn't keep living or keep allowing my body to feel these things anymore, right? Um, and therapist was like, I'm not, you know, this is not how this works, right? It can't just fix you, right? It's a process. You know, it takes some time. And then she taught me how to have these kind of conversations with my body, to just slow down time, right? And try to notice what's there, right? To stay curious, right? And allow myself to have more access to choice. So that's what I want to invite folks to do, right? To recognize, you know, when your body is feeling a threat, whether it's real or perceived threat, right? And give yourself, you deserve time to just slow down and stop. Give yourself the opportunity, you know, to ground, right? So that you can respond from a place of integrity, and the place that generates healing, right? So let me look at the comments, see if anything came up for anybody here. So the exercise that we did today was just really, you know, kind of surface level, just to kind of like familiarize ourselves with like the layer of narrative that our bodies are holding on to. I have a number of other exercises that allow you to sit longer and engage in deeper dialogue with your discomfort. If you want those visualizations and you want those exercises, you can email me, wetakeroot@gmail.com. I'll also have some upcoming workshops. I do, me and Amy Paulson, who's online now. Hey, friend, Amy. Antoine Olivier. And Sal Tran also has been a facilitator. And then we got another co-facilitator who we're working to train. We lead an 8-week workshop called Healing Cycles of Harm that allows us to do, you know, this kind of work, kind of like that deeper engagement, kind of just discovering and uncovering, you know, where those hidden narratives are. We also talk about and try to experiment with different responses to those triggers. Hey. Let's see, do you think that folks have been keep them from slowing down? Okay, so one thing, thank you for bringing that up, Kathy. One thing I want to mention is that I am not a therapist. The kind of tools that I'm introducing here are tools that, you know, I've used on myself, tools that that I've learned from other folks, that I've learned from and with Amy Paulson and Antoine Olivier, that have worked for me, right? And everything that I suggest here is that a suggestion. You take what works for you, you take what doesn't. If you're dealing with, you know, some other underlying issues, I highly recommend that you talk to someone that specializes in that. We actually have somebody on chat right now who does amazing work and does therapy and coaching. Dr. Lem. I posted it on our event page. If I can, I will also respond to this thread with the same information. And you know what? I will also post a resource and if other folks want to do this, also post some resources for other therapists. If folks are struggling with some other specific issues like ADHD, right? Other questions. Okay, I see Amy Paulson. Titrating in small amounts is important. Yes. And that awareness of like how much titrating is, like maintaining an awareness of how much that your body can take. So it takes a lot of compassion for yourself, care for yourself. And this is not about re-traumatizing yourself. This is not about harming yourself again. This is about just being curious, and seeing what's there. Right? Other questions or thoughts before I close the session? Thank you. All right, beautiful people. Thank you so much for being part of this experiment, this live. I appreciate the patience as I try to figure out all of my tech issues and how to do Facebook Live here. Again, this is going to be posted up on all platforms. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for the work that you do too. Kathy does some like amazing work supporting our homeless folks during this pandemic. And Kathy's taught me a lot about healing as well. So I appreciate your leadership, Kathy. All right, beautiful people. I am signing off. And if you have any questions or anything came up for you that you want to process, I'm here. If you want to email me or if you want to DM me, that's cool too. All right. Peace out.